Hello everyone, this is my first video, and today we're going to be covering the T-60 light tank. It was a Soviet tank that was developed and produced during the Second World War and had a pretty short but interesting service life, so let's hop right into it. The development of the Soviet T-60 began with the T-38 and T-40 light tanks, interwar vehicles which were notable for their amphibious capability, being some of the only amphibious military vehicles at the time of their introduction. I'm not going to get too into the weeds of these vehicles, though. Imagine them as primitive light tanks or reconnaissance vehicles. Following the events and experience of the Spanish Civil War, the Soviet Union realized that their armor may be outdated. This sentiment was further compounded by failures in the war against Finland in 1939, where the T-38 and 40 proved vulnerable to infantry. The T-38 and 40 were seen as limited by their amphibious capability, as for them to float, their armor had to be weakened to such a point that even small arms could pose a threat to the vehicles. Furthermore, the 12.7mm DSHK machine gun mounted on these vehicles was deemed ineffective over longer ranges. Attempts were thus made to rearm the designs in 1940 by replacing the Dushka machine gun with a modified Shavak 20mm aircraft-based autocannon. This variant was known as the T-40S or the T-30, and the modified cannon was renamed the TNSH. While the issues of the previous armament were solved, at least in context, issues with the protection persisted. A completely new hull was designed, with a slanted frontal plate replacing the T-38's larger, flatter frontal profile. The turret was also redesigned, and the rounder shape of the T-38 was replaced with a polygonal shape to ease production. This new vehicle was designated the T-60 and accepted into production at the eve of the German invasion. At the top here, we have a photo of a T-38 light tank. You can see the 12.7 heavy machine gun mounted in the turret, as well as the very large lower front plate. On the right here, we see the T-40S. Which was really just a prototype. It's sitting here in the Kubinka Tank Museum. You can see the 20mm cannon mounted on it, though again it is essentially just a 20mm cannon mounted into a T-38 chassis. And on the bottom here, we just see a side profile of the T-40S. The Soviet State Defense Committee Decree number 222 imposed strict deadlines for the production and distribution of T-60 tank blueprints and documentation, which proved to be challenging. The initial plan was to send out documentation by July 27th of 1941, but delays caused the blueprints to be distributed starting on July 28th of the same year, with most reaching KHTZ, who is the primary manufacturer of these vehicles, by August 10th. In mid-August, the Ordzo factory, another factory involved with production of the T-60, produced the experimental tank hull, and factory number 37 began assembly of the first T-60 on August 17th, 1941. This prototype, completed by late August, was driven by lead designers Ashraf and Ukhanev from Moscow to Gorky, setting the foundation for mass production, improving the vehicle's reliability. However, they quickly returned to factory number 37 to oversee critical production of the older T-30 tanks mentioned earlier. KHTZ faced significant challenges, including a lack of technical conditions for quality assurance and parts kits by mid-August. Despite these delays and other blueprint delays, production preparations began in early August, with KHTZ coordinating with KHEMZ to spread the workload. However, subcontractor delays, especially for hulls and turrets, hampered production. The first experimental hull from the October Revolution factory was completed only by the end of August. The KHTZ-16 armored tractor project, initiated by KHTZ, further complicated matters. Approved the same day as the T-60, the factory initially prioritized the tractor over the T-60 until upper-level management intervenes, accelerating the T-60 production. Despite receiving initial hulls and turrets from the Krasny Kodalshik and October Revolution factories by mid-September, only 7 tanks were completed that month due to engine shortages. Production at Molotov Gaz, or GAZ, faced similar issues. Documentation delays from subcontractors meant GAZ couldn't meet initial production quotas. By mid-September, several subcontractors had started but not completed hulls and turrets. The first hull arrived on September 17th, with the first T-60 assembled there that same day. A dedicated assembly plant, number 5, was set up for T-60 production. Under pressure from the Central Committee of the VKB, GAZ shifted priorities from trucks to tanks in September. Ashraf and Oknev, again the lead designers for the T-60, moved to GAZ in mid-October, aiding production. Despite initial shortfalls, GAZ managed to produce 69 T-60s by October 20th, eventually surpassing its October quota. However, the success came at a high cost. Gaz was a well-known and very prominent truck and car producer, and very necessary during the war. Though, with the production of the T-60, car production at GAZ was nearly paralyzed by late October, with many vehicles production halted to focus on T-60 tanks. The factory faced additional challenges with the evacuation of factory number 37 and the repurposing of T-30 hulls and turrets for the T-60 production. Production innovations included designing longer and wider track lengths, reworking the suspension, and simplifying electrical equipment, and even removing radios. Despite not fully meeting Decree number 222, GAZ produced 1,314 tanks in 1941. That's including 131 chassis for the M8 rocket artillery system, and establishing itself as a major tank manufacturer, at least in terms of light tanks. The T-60, while limited in firepower and armor, proved vital for infantry support and reconnaissance from late 1941 to early 1943, and even longer in specific regions like Leningrad and Karelia until fall of 1944. At the top left here we see early trials of the T-60. You can see there's a number of engineers working around it. Also note the gun is missing from this vehicle. I can imagine this was taken probably in, late summer, early fall of 1941. On the right here, top right I should say, we have a GAZ produced T-60. This one survived the war and looks to be in good condition. It's not really distinguishable from other production T-60s, but notably you can differentiate the GAZ vehicles by their spoked road wheels versus the solid road wheels of other manufacturers, and I think this image does good justice in showing that. On the bottom here we have the war simplified T-60. Frontally it's not particularly apparent, the differences, but if you compare it to the picture on the top right, you can see it's missing the small horn mounted to the right of the driver's position. And again, on the interior, many of these were missing radios and other equipment. The T-60 had a rather low profile at just 1.7 meters or 5 feet 7 inches tall. The small build of the tank limited the crew to just 2 men, which required the man in the turret to act as loader, gunner, radio operator, and commander. The turret itself was a polygonal shape, welded together in 2 parts, providing a simple component to produce. Basic vision ports were added around the sides of the turret, providing at least some form of rudimentary visibility. The quick-firing 20mm TNSH cannon was mounted coaxially alongside a 7.62mm DT machine gun, giving the T-60 modest firepower, at least against infantry and soft targets, though as the war progressed, the shortcomings of the system became apparent. The driver was mounted in the center front of the vehicle, only having access to a single forward-facing vision slit, severely limiting his situational awareness in combat. The vehicle was powered by a 12 horsepower GAZ-203 engine and thin steel tracks, capable of moving the tank at up to 27 miles per hour on good terrain, or 14 miles per hour off-road. Acceptable speeds at the time, though certainly on the more sluggish end of the spectrum. From 1941 onwards, the T-60 spoke road wheels were replaced with a solid metal design, designed for simplification in production. Armor protection had been the main driver in developing the T-60 as a replacement for the T-38, with the slanted frontal armor plate thickened to 35 millimeters. Still rather weak, though less susceptible to shell fragments in anti-tank rifles compared to the T-38. The vehicle's design is comparable to others of the time, namely the German Panzer II, which also took on an automatic cannon as its primary armament. At the top here, we can see some technical drawings of the T-60. Note that the road wheels here are of the Elate type. You can see that they're solid as compared to the T-60 present on the bottom, in which case you see the spoked road wheels. This is also a good photo of just how tall this vehicle is. It looks like the mannequin standing beside it is likely 5'8", 5'7", so definitely not a large tank by any design. You know, certainly a small tank, even by Soviet standards. The T-60, although filling a critical role during the early stages of Operation Barbarossa, was widely criticized for its shortcomings. Soviet Major General M.E. Katukov highlighted its inadequacies in a 1942 meeting with Stalin, pointing out the 20mm gun's ineffectiveness in serious armored combat and the tank's poor performance off-road. The T-60 held the nickname of a brother's grave for two, reflecting the crew's sentiment regarding the vehicle's vulnerability to enemy attack. Despite these drawbacks, the T-60 did play a crucial role in the dire circumstances of 1941 and 1942, with Katukov himself acknowledging its importance during the defense around Moscow, where his T-60s, hidden on the rye fields, managed to infiltrate German lines and disrupt their advance, helping halt their advance. However, by the later stages of the war, the T-60 was largely relegated to secondary roles such as reconnaissance, headquarters defense, convoy escort, and training new crews. Captured T-60s were often repurposed by the Germans and their allies as tow vehicles, and appreciated for their reasonable range amidst a general shortage of Axis recovery vehicles. The T-60, with its limited firepower and armor, may have been better than nothing in the desperate early war years for the Soviet Union, but it was far from an ideal combat vehicle. Its role evolved from frontline engagement to support function as more capable Soviet tanks became available. And I touched on Axis captures of the T-60, and at the bottom of the slide here, you can actually see a German T-60, and you can also notice it's missing its gun. This likely implies that it is some sort of armored recovery vehicle, maybe a tow vehicle, but, you know, in this photo, it's just a hulk. It's been knocked out. Not too uncommon for T-60s. At the top here, you can see just how thin the T-60's armor is. There's a large gap, not a gap, I mean a hole in the upper front plate, and you can see just how thin that upper front plate is, which normally should be one of the most armored parts on a tank. And then on the right there, we see a burning T-60. I don't think its engine was particularly vulnerable to catching fire any more than other Soviet engines, but, you know, I'm sure it was damaged by other means before, you know, being lit on fire. A number of variants spawned off the T-60, both in Soviet and Axis service. The most common variant was the BM-824, a rocket artillery system built off the chassis of a turretless T-60, equipped with 24 82mm Katyusha rockets, mounted 12/12. This variant proved popular as it performed better than the BM-13 off-road and saw service across the Eastern Front until the end of the war. In 1942, one T-60 was attached to a glider system to be towed behind a larger bomber or heavy aircraft as an air-deployable tank system for the airborne forces. This prototype was designated the A-40, though poor performance in trials led to the abandonment of the project, with only one prototype completed. Finally, Fascist Romania captured 34 T-60s in 1943, which they converted into tank destroyers by replacing the turret with a lightly armored superstructure, armed with an also captured Soviet F-22 gun. These vehicles deserve a video of their own, but they survived at least until 1944, though their fate after this is cloudy. It was likely captured again by the Soviets and destroyed. There's plenty of other smaller variants, again, mostly just recovery variants, tow vehicles, and other lesser variants that are not particularly worth putting on the slide. Anyways, that's the end of the video. This is my first video, so I'd be glad if you guys could give me some feedback in the comments. I'm just trying to figure this out. I use PowerPoint. This didn't take very long, but I know my mic quality isn't very good, but I just kind of want to make a video just to at least get the basics down on how to do it. And with that, maybe this will turn into a series. I don't know, but we'll see. Anyways, that's all. Have a good rest of your day.